Chapter 11:11 Evelyn's Escape. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Ugh, my head hurts. What happened? As Evelyn started coming to consciousness after her less than gentle toss into a cage, she suddenly opened her eyes wide in realization. The events that had happened leading up to her capture and current confinement all came rushing back to her, and along with it a sense of helplessness. She was currently stuck in a cage in some sort of underground facility she did not know the purpose of. At first, she thought maybe it was some sort of beast-selling operation. But that went out the window quickly, as she saw the mangled corpse of Wolf being dragged out of another room that lay beyond a set of doors she hoped never to cross through. Now her options had plummeted, and she figured that it was probably one of two very unideal situations. Either this was some sort of lab where they were doing experiments, or these people got their jollies off of torturing animals. Though it really did not matter which situation it was, because as she continued to observe for hours that not a single beast that went into the room came out alive, or even in one piece for that matter. However, as Evelyn watched these horrors, she realized that eventually it was going to be her turn. No, not again. She thought, a renewed sparking igniting in her. She remembered the torture and the pain she had suffered and would do anything she could to not die practically the same way twice. Feeling sorry for herself was not going to help, and now that she was not in constant crushing pain or under the effects of the paralytic drug, her head had cleared a bit. Her human mind was her greatest asset, and she was going to need it if she was to escape. First, she went over and checked the mechanism that kept the cage closed, but found that whatever it was could not be seen or felt from within the cage. She then tried ramming her body against the cage, hoping to maybe get it to topple over, but that was a failure as well. The cage was bolted into the wall, and her efforts to move it only caused her already sore body to hurt even more. Hoot! Hoot! Crying out from the cage, she hoped that maybe her parents were nearby, but the only response she got was from her owl brother, who she was now blaming for this mess. If he had not gotten caught in that trap to begin with, none of this would have happened, and she could have continued her happy and carefree life as an owl. Letting out a sigh, she had been wishing that her parents would have been close by, but it appeared that they were being held elsewhere, or maybe had already been subjected to whatever horrors lied beyond this room. Damn, what am I supposed to do now? Evelyn thought, trying to figure some way out of her predicament. She had found it impossible to open the cage or move it, and the bars were far too sturdy for her to break through. This left her only escape option to be having someone else open the cage. Unfortunately, she had watched what went on over the last few hours, and whenever a cage was opened, the beast inside was quickly grabbed by a pole with a rope on the end of it to prevent any chance of escape. Of course, getting out of her cage would still only be the first step, and after that she would pretty much need a miracle to escape back outside. Still, it was a possibility, and she was going to take her chance. Anyway, what was the worst they could do to her if she was caught escaping? It appeared that whatever future she had here was already going to end in a terrible, painful death. So, she might as well try to escape. At the very least I should be able to open the doors. All I have to do is push the handles and the doors seem to slide back with ease. With a basic plan forming in her mind, Evelyn began focusing on the first matter at hand, which was getting out of her cage. Luckily, she eventually came up with what she thought would be her best chance. Every few hours or so, someone would come by and check on the cages and give the trapped beast some water. When that happened next, Evelyn was going to make her move. But first she had to steel herself and prepare for some more pain. Bending her head down towards her feet, she stretched her body to the limit and got her claws close enough to touch her tongue. It was an uncomfortable position to hold, but she needed to do it in order to enact the first part of her plan. Taking one of her talons, she sliced her own tongue, which hurt quite a bit, but was still nothing compared to what she had experienced before. Okay, now I have the blood that I need, so I just have to wait. Evelyn thought as she allowed the blood to pool in her mouth and released a bit around her neck. Soon the man that checked on the cages came by, and Evelyn made her move. She threw herself down heavily onto the floor of the cage and spit up the mouthful of blood she had been saving. For added effect she even made terrible screeching sounds that certainly sounded like a dying bird. Then as the man hurried over to check out what was wrong, she went completely still and played dead. Seeing this, the guy said what Evelyn could only guess were curses as he opened the cage to pull her out and see what was wrong. Luckily for Evelyn, these people seemed to want any and all of the beasts they had captured alive. So, by pretending to die, she had managed to get this guy flustered enough to forget protocol and tie her down before opening the cage. The second the man opened the cage, she dropped her act and lashed out at him claws first. Racking across his eyes, she succeeded in catching the man completely off guard and blinded him. It was a brutal attack, but at this point, Evelyn really did not care what she had to do to escape so long as she did. It was lucky that this guy seems to be a pretty much normal person, since I am not sure what I would have done if he was another monster that could use magic. Evelyn thought as she jumped out of the cage, while the man she had just maimed rolled around on the ground clutching his eyes. With her freedom from the cage achieved, she made her way right over to the door and pushed with all her might on the handle. Fortunately, it required only a light force to unseal the door, and once it could be opened, she wedged her body in the crack and slowly pushed open the sliding door. Free of the room where beasts were held captive, Evelyn took one last look behind her, thinking about trying to rescue her family. Yet after just a second, she shook her head and flew off down the corridor towards the underground facility's exit. She knew that going to search for her parents was a suicide mission and would only make her already low chances of escape plummet to zero. Certainly, she had grown attached to her parents that had loved her unconditionally, but she had really only known them for a few months. Therefore, choosing between getting out alive or sacrificing herself to try and save them, the answer was obvious to Evelyn. It won't do me any good to die here with them. I just need to escape and not let their sacrifices be in vain. Flying down the corridor, she moved as fast as she could towards the exit, praying that she would not run into anyone. And by some miracle she avoided detection down the entire corridor, as no one was traversing down it or had exited any of the doors that periodically lined the walls. Soon, she made it to the cellar door that would lead her outside and began searching for a latch or lever to open it. However, unlike the doors within the facility that opened easily with a push handle, this one seemed to have no way to operate it from here. Unfortunately, this door could only be opened by magic, which Evelyn could not use and did not know to use. She had made it to the goal, but there seemed to be no salvation at the end of the tunnel. It was only a matter of time until she was discovered and recaptured at this rate. Do I search the entire place for some sort of button or switch that opens this hatch? Or maybe try and find another way out? Evelyn thought, weighing her options. Except, her option became limited even further as she heard footsteps coming down the corridor. At the very least, as she listened, they did not sound hasty, so she doubted it was someone looking for her. Maybe they are leaving. I need somewhere to hide. Thinking on her feet, Evelyn searched for some place to conceal herself, and soon found the darkest corner on the ceiling. Flying up there, she wedged herself in this corner, just barely managing to get enough purchase to hold herself up. Soon the man's footfalls she had heard came down the corridor and up to the cellar door. He was a man she had not seen yet, had graying hair, and wore a black robe similar but higher quality to the little man she had seen when she was first brought into the room full of caged beasts. But as she looked at him closely, it was his eyes that stood out to her, because she recognized them. They were the same eyes that her killer had. Eyes that showed no remorse and reveled in the pain of others. Placing his hand on the door, the man's arm began to glow ever so slightly blue, as he channeled in a bit of his magical energy and opened the lock on the door. Seeing the door opening and what appeared to be a bit of moonlight flooding in, Evelyn wanted to leap out from her hiding spot and fly out into the forest. Still, she restrained herself and waited. She needed to let this man go first and follow behind him to minimize her chances of being seen. So long as she was careful, it was likely she would not be spotted or heard due to her stealthy nature as an owl. Now, 6 seconds after the man had left, Evelyn jumped out from her hiding spot and flew towards the door that had just begun closing. Just barely threading through, she managed to escape the building right before the door closed and was once again out in the open air. She had managed to do it, she had escaped this awful facility and could now try and live her normal life in this world as an owl. The guy has not seen me and has his back to me. Time to fly in the opposite direction and get out of this forest and away from these guys. Turning in the opposite direction the man was walking, Evelyn flew towards the woods, making her final escape. There was no turning back now, and while she did really regret abandoning her family, she simply could not face down another torturous end. However, as so very often had happened to Evelyn, the greatest cruelties of life seemed to find her. Right before she passed into the depths of the forest, she felt something tugging on one of her legs, and she suddenly reeled back as if she was connected to some type of cord. Regaining her bearing as she started falling, she turned around and saw with horror in her eyes that what looked like a thin blue thread was attached to her left leg. Then there was another hard yank as she was pulled out of the sky. Yet she did not hit the ground, instead, being caught in the arms of someone. Though this gave her no sense of comfort, as she realized who had just grabbed a hold of her. Looking up, she saw the man who had just exited the facility, allowing for her escape. Smiling down at her with a grin that made her heart stop for a moment out of fear. Chapter 12 Experiment begins. You are listening at novelfull.audio. It looks like the reports of your intelligence were not exaggerated. You really are able to make complex plans and see them through. Even though I purposefully set up the situation, it is surprising that a wild beast would be able to hold this level of intelligence. I dare say you are probably smarter than most fiend beasts. Smiling widely, the man who had just captured Evelyn was very happy about the results of his little test. He had wanted to see the actual level that the supposedly abnormally intelligent young owl had. At first, he had thought that the claims were being exaggerated, and the beast just got lucky to figure out the mechanism that worked their simple cage traps. But now that he had tested her, it was apparent that her intelligence held up to the reports. Oh, now that I take a good look into your eyes I can see it, a level of fear that just a captured beast should not have. You are absolutely terrified to your core, aren't you? You know what is about to happen. After the man said this, he began cackling a bit like a madman, absolutely thrilled to have a new promising subject to work on. Now I have waited long enough to use you and those other owls. You all are the most promising subjects I have gotten my hands on in a while, so I will make sure to collect some very useful data. With Evelyn recaptured after her orchestrated escape, the man who was the lead researcher at this lab turned around and headed back towards the entrance. This was when the freezing fear that Evelyn was feeling changed back into panic, and she tried fighting back. She struggled, attempting to wrest her body free, but the man just tightened his grip to the point that she could barely breathe. Understanding that she was not going to get away like this, she tried to jam her claws into his arm, but found that they could not even pierce his clothing. For all her efforts she made, she achieved no progress in escaping, and the man simply chuckled at her attempt. He then brought her back into the base, down the corridor, and into the room where the captured beasts were stored. Waiting for him there were 4 assistants dressed in similar black robes, one of which was the little man she had seen when she first arrived here. Seeing this, it was quite obvious to Evelyn that this had been their plan to begin with, and any notion of control she had thought she had was all an illusion. Grab the other one and then we can begin. The researcher said to his assistants. The 4 men nodded, and one of them moved over to the cage Evelyn's brother was being kept in and retrieved him. With all the pieces now ready, these 5 men headed into the depths of the lab and passed through the set of doors that had spelled death to every beast that had ever entered them. As soon as they passed through these doors, Evelyn saw that there were all sorts of instruments within the room. Most of them looked foreign to her, but the saws and blades were certainly easy enough for her to recognize. However, what got her attention quickly after that was her parents, who were both in this room. The 2 of them were not in cages but appeared to be completely out in the open. Yet when they saw their children being brought into this room of horrors, even thought they had been completely still before, they began thrashing around and screeching loudly. Unfortunately, as they tried to move forward, two circles that had been carved above and below them lit up and a barrier of some kind erected around them preventing them from leaving. It is good to see that they still have some spirit left in them. They had been so docile and quiet for the last few hours that I was beginning to worry. The researcher said with a devilish smile as he looked at Evelyn's parents flailing around. He then snapped his fingers, and two of his assistants went and grabbed some metallic poles that were held on the wall like pool sticks. While the ones holding Evelyn and her brother placed them on a raised platform that prevented them from moving. With what Evelyn could only guess was some kind of magic. With these tools in hand, they moved over to the barrier that Evelyn's mother was sealed in and pushed them through like there was nothing there. Each of the four poles then grew what looked like a shimmering blue rope at the end and wrapped themselves around Evelyn's mother. One secured itself around her neck, while two held her wings in place, and the final one tied up both of her feet. Having secured their first subject, the researcher went over and placed his hand on the barrier which shimmered to life again. A moment later it disappeared under his command and Evelyn's mother was released. She tired struggling, wanting to fight back, but the restraints that had been attached to her prevented her from using most of her strength and kept her in place. Watching all of this, Evelyn felt her heart ache since she knew that this was going to be the second time she had to watch her mother die. Why do I have to watch this? Why do I have to be here? Evelyn thought, as the fear and crushing despair weighed down on her even heavier. She wanted to just shut off her emotions and ride this out hoping it would be over soon, but her heart and mind simply would not listen. Soon the researcher and his assistants had Evelyn's mom tied up to a large table that sat in the middle of the room and was no doubt where they administered their horrible experiments. Looking at each of the assistants, Evelyn was able to see that they were all holding some type of device. Though she had no idea what they did. Then the researcher who had left for a moment quickly came back and in his hands was a clear box that had etchings all along its borders. Except it was not the box that was interesting, but what was stored inside, which was a small dark purple sphere that had 4 rings rotating around it. From where she was, she could see this item, and it felt oppressive. As if just being near it threatened to crush her into nothing. Looking out in horror, she watched as the researcher placed the box right on her mother's chest. Now, shall we begin? Chapter 1313, spoiler, title at the bottom of the, you are listening at novelfull.audio. Now, shall we begin? After saying this and receiving enthusiastic nods from his assistants, the researcher clicked a button on the side of the box and opened it. Immediately the sphere that was surrounded by 4 rotating rings began moving. It headed straight towards Evelyn's mom like it was magnetically attracted to her. As soon as this strange object touched her it began passing through her feather, skin, and bones. It pressed through like there was nothing in its way and was soon inside Evelyn's mother. Yet it had not caused any damage, having gone through as if it did not have any mass and was just an illusion. However, the pain screeching and thrashing of Evelyn's mother were certainly not caused by an illusion. Her body convulsed and her bones started creaking as soon as this item entered her. Blood began pouring out of her mouth, eyes, and ears, all the while she screeched out in ungodly pain. Seeing this, Evelyn felt a spine-chilling terror, and like another hole was being ripped through her already torn apart heart. She had already seen one mother die and did not want to watch it happen again. However, as she tried to turn away, her body simply would not move. Whatever magic that was keeping her and her brother paralyzed preventing her from even closing her eyes. Realizing that her only option was to continue watching. Evelyn stared at her mother with concern as she continued thrashing about as bones broke and blood flooded out of her body. All the while the researcher and his 4 assistants were just watching intently, while taking the occasional glance at the devices they were holding. This went on for a good 50 minutes as Evelyn's mother tried her best to survive whatever the item that had entered her was doing. But eventually, she gave out. It was heartbreaking to see as the last will to struggle to survive left her mother, and Evelyn was certain she had died. The last spark of life leaving her as she glanced over at her children one last time. Now all that was left was her mangled corpse that sat in a pool of its own blood and had broken bones jutting out of it. Tears welled up in Evelyn's eyes seeing this, and flowed down her face as the grief of what had just happened overcame her. Again, she had watched helpless as her mother died due to brutality outside of her control. It was all too similar as to what had happened to her before, and the emotional strain was enough to make Evelyn weep. Oh, now this is most fascinating. The researcher said as he looked over at Evelyn. It seemed that he could care less about her mother who he had just run his vile experiment on, having already expected this outcome. He quickly moved over to Evelyn and began prodding around her eyes, and looking intently at her. I never expected to see this. To think that a wild beast would cry over its dead mother. I have only ever observed this response in other people. How truly fascinating. Pulling out a notebook he kept on him, he began writing down all kinds of notes about Evelyn's abnormal emotional responses for a beast. Eventually though, he stopped as the short assistant came over and handed him a sheet of paper, presumably with the results of the test that had been performed on Evelyn's mother. I see. The time she lasted was on average 8 times more than the wild beasts we normally use and 3 times more than the average fiend beast. Still her time was only in the top 90 percentile. I had hoped for a bit more. He then received more reports from his other assistants and looked them over before nodding his head. Well, I believe that at least my hypothesis is partly correct. Let us try again with the other one and collect some more data. After the researcher said this, his 4 assistants went to work, and started by grabbing the blades and saws that hung on one of the walls. They cut out a large incision into the chest of the corpse of Evelyn's mother and sawed away the bone. Soon they had made a large hole, with which they placed the glass box over. Slowly the sphere that had entered Evelyn's mother and certainly killed her, floated back out into the center of the box which closed automatically once its contents were returned. With the object that they were testing now returned to its container, they began cleaning up the area and carted the remains of Evelyn's mother away. When things were clean once again, they started the process over again. First securing Evelyn's father before strapping him down to the table and preparing their instruments. Once they were fully prepared, the professor opened the box again and the dark purple sphere surrounded by 4 rings floated towards Evelyn's father. Just like before it entered into his body without a trace, and moments later he began convulsing and screeching out in incredible pain. Quickly the same ghastly injuries that had occurred for Evelyn's mother began to happen to her father. Blood poured out of every part of his body and his bones broke and pierced through his skin. His feather even began to fall out like an animal shedding its winter coat as the pain was too much for him to take. Still, he fought and fought hard to stay alive. Now that his partner was gone, he was the only hope his children had. And while he knew whatever had been put inside him was killing him, he could also sense that it also had great power. If he could somehow subdue it, maybe he could wield its power to free himself and his children. He struggled for over 3 hours, which had very much impressed the research and his assistants. At this point he had already passed the greatest amount of time any of the other subjects had survived by over 20 minutes. Then for the first time the researcher and his assistants watched as one of their subjects' bodies began to heal. It appeared that the integration of the item had been successful, and the broken bones began to pull themselves back into Evelyn's father's body. Not long after this process began his body was fully restored, and the researcher and his assistants looked at him with eyes full of hope and intrigue. Yet this look swiftly vanished, as they all realized that even though this was the closest they had ever gotten, it still ended in failure. Great, it died even after all that. Looks like its soul just could not keep up even though its body was compatible. Chapter 13 Another Family's End. Chapter 14 Rage. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. After watching the life of her father fade away, Evelyn felt like an ice-cold dagger had been thrust into her heart. This was the second time she had to witness both of her parents die, and it was immensely painful as these new wounds reopened all of the old ones she had tried so hard to forget. Next, they will kill my new brother and then it will be complete. I will have had to watch my family die again. Losing herself, Evelyn's thoughts and emotions were in so much turmoil she had practically gone catatonic. However, this state did not last long, as once the researcher and his assistants had finished retrieving the item that had killed both of Evelyn's parents, he walked right up to her. Oh, it looks like your spirit has begun to break. But that is no good. Ah, I know. Leaving Evelyn be for now, the researcher went over to his assistants and gave them some more orders, before heading out of the room. Yet when he came back, Evelyn was forcefully pulled from her numb state that her body had entered to try and protect herself. Bang! Being thrown down in front of her were the heads of both her parents, and the emotions she had bottled up for only a little while burst free again. Despair, sadness, grief, they all came rushing back to her as her parents' heads were thrust in front of her. However, as she looked up from her parents' severed heads and looked at the psychopath who had done this to them, a new set of emotion began to rise up. Anger, rage, hatred. Ugly emotions that she had tried to keep down since they had only made her life harder. The last time she had experienced emotions like these, she killed the man who had tormented her for years. Her original father. For all this man had done to her and her new family, she wanted to kill him. No longer was fear what motivated her to want to escape. Now she wanted to get free and gouged this man's throat out with her talons. Yes, that is better. I can see the murder in your eyes, that you hate me. Of course, why would you not after I had you locked in a cage and killed your parents? Now make sure to remember how much you want to kill me. It might just be what you need to survive. After saying this, the researcher grabbed a hold of Evelyn and pulled her off of the platform she was on. Immediately she felt her body regain its ability to move, and she began thrashing around trying to hurt this man. Unfortunately, even though she was now far more motivated to kill him, it did not change the fact that she was powerless to do so. Soon, the researcher had personally tied Evelyn up to the table where her parents had recently met their ends. Chief, are you really sure that you want to go through with this? I think that this owl could make a good test subject for other experiments in the future. Do you really want to waste her on this when she has nearly 100% chance of death? One of the researcher's assistants asked. Yes, I do. This is the pressing matter we have been tasked with right now, and I believe that this owl has what we have been lacking so far in all of our test subjects so far. Her soul is far stronger than it should be, and I believe that has been the underlying factor that has ended with every other subject being a failure. Nodding his head, the assistant fell back in line and began preparing to record what data he could, once their next subject came in contact with the item they were studying. With everything set up, the researcher once again brought out the clear box that contained the dark purple sphere with 4 rings spinning around it. Placing it over Evelyn's chest, he opened it up and waited for it to gravitate towards her. All the while Evelyn stared hatefully at this man who had destroyed her new life, all in the pursuit of whatever twisted goals he had. Certainly, she felt fear since she had seen this object kill her parents and knew it had killed many other beasts as well. Still, her terror could not seem to overpower her anger, and in fact fueled it. She was fed up with the cruelty she was always forced to experience and wanted to lash out and strike back at those who hurt her. However, her current situation gave her no chance to enact any sort of vengeance, and soon the object had floated right up to her. It quickly began passing into her chest, and Evelyn felt a slight tinglingly sensation as it did. Then for a moment she felt nothing, before her body pulsed and the pain began. Now she could feel the item inside her trying to attach itself to her body and soul. What the hell is this thing? She thought before another wave of indescribable pain washed over her. Just like her parents and all the beasts that had been exposed to this item, Evelyn's body began to break apart as this sphere tried to make a connection. Immediately blood began pouring out of her and her bones broke apart, as the power within the sphere spread out over her body. She could tell that it was trying to remake her, but for what purpose she did not know. Pain and more pain began to compile in her body as every second seemed like an eternity of agony. At many points she almost wanted to give in and let the pain take her until she felt nothing, but her rage kept her going. She could feel it now that there was some power in this object that was remaking her, and just as her father had, she realized that she may be able to use it. I have endured pain all my life. I can get through this. I have even died before, so this is nothing. Evelyn screamed within her own head. The images of those that she hated began flashing through her mind. First was her father who had beaten her all through her childhood until she killed him. Next was the psycho who murdered her and her brother after torturing them for weeks. Finally, the face of the man who had killed her new parents and was currently using her in his savage experiment. These were the people she could never forgive for what they had done to her, and she wanted them all to die. Holding on to this desire, Evelyn fought through the pain even as she was ripped apart body and soul. It was only due to her past trauma and her desire to avenge herself that she was able to stay alive through this process. Her soul that had been tempered through unimaginable pain and suffering, was just able to hold out against the overwhelming power held within the item that had been forced into her. Eventually her body stopped breaking apart and her soul was no longer being ripped to shreds. Her bones began to knit back together and the blood that had flowed out of her began to be sucked back in. Quickly she was fully restored with not a single mark to indicate that she had just gone through hell. Seeing this, the researcher and his assistants practically began jumping with joy as they reveled in their first successes. However, their celebrating did not last long, stopping the moment Evelyn opened her eyes. Chapter 15:15 New Favorite Test Subject. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. As Evelyn's eyes shot open, she felt a surging of power coming from the sphere that had just merged with her. It pulsed with energy, and a wave of heaviness permeated her body until it burst out from her. Immediately the straps that were holding her in place ripped apart under this pressure, and the table that she had been laying on began to fold and crush like a flimsy aluminum can. An area of 10 feet around Evelyn began to be affected by the force the sphere was emitting with her at the epicenter. The floor around her began to sink in, and the entire room shook under the pressure that had surrounded her. Yet even though she was in the center of this phenomena, it was not affecting her in any way. What is going on? She thought as she looked around at the destruction she was causing. Opening her eyes wide, Evelyn quickly realized something about her current situation as she looked at the researcher and his assistants who had backed off away from her. Now she was free, and while she certainly had no idea what kind of power currently surrounded her or how to control it, all she needed to do was move. Aiming herself at the closest person, she began flying towards him, much to his surprise, and as she pushed him against the wall, the force that was being emitted around her beginning to crushing him. Soon the man who was one of the researcher's assistants was flattened like a pancake against the wall as Evelyn pushed herself closer. With one down, she turned her sights on the next person and began flying towards him as well. She was intent to kill all of these men who had forced her to experience pain that was beyond inhuman. They had to pay for what they had done, and now that she had the ability to, she was going to crush them all until all that was left of them was paste. Unfortunately, her revenge came to an early end, as the researcher grabbed the box the sphere was formerly being stored in and threw it towards Evelyn as she flew towards the next person. As the box flew through the air, it began to break apart and the 6 panes of runic glass moved to surround Evelyn. All at once the power that Evelyn, or more precisely the item she had merged with was discharging, was forced back inside. The bubble of force surrounding her completely receded, and following its disappearance, Evelyn collapsed onto the ground as the box closed in around her, sealing her inside. After that she felt nothing, and it seemed that time was no longer passing for her as the box placed her into a state of stasis. With Evelyn now contained, the researcher walked over to her and picked up the box while looking at her intently while she was frozen in place. For the first time he had gotten a glimpse of the true power of the divine item that his sect had gotten a hold of, and that was his job to uncover the secrets of. Finally, we have a suitable test subject to work with, he thought, as he turned towards his assistants who were still reeling from Evelyn's outburst. You three, hurry up and consolidate the data we have gathered and get this place cleaned up. I know that it is shocking that Stefan is dead, but these are the risks we take in the pursuit of knowledge. Nodding their heads, now that the shock had begun to wear off, the researchers' 3 remaining assistants went to work on following their master's orders. While they were doing that, he took Evelyn with him and began making preparation for the next step of testing, and to contact his superiors about this breakthrough. During this time Evelyn saw nothing, heard nothing, and thought nothing. Her entire being was completely frozen, and for her it was as if no time passed even as days went by. Eventually, though, her state of suspended animation ended, and when she came to, she noticed that she was once again in the lab and strapped down. However, this time the power that had expanded around her previously was gone and nowhere to be seen. Soon she felt a painful shock run through her body as a long pole jabbed into her side. Feeling this pain, Evelyn tried to summon the power of the item she had merged with, but it stayed dormant. No reaction. The researcher said, as he pulled back the pole that he had just used to shock Evelyn. He was currently standing far back in order to make sure that he was out of the range of the power that Evelyn had demonstrated last time while conducting his tests. Seeing him there, she squinted her eyes and glared at him. Her hatred nearly palpable. Smiling, the researcher was happy to see that she was still motivated and stuck her again. Getting a sick pleasure out of watching her writhe in agony. I'll kill him. I swear that I will. Evelyn thought as she was shocked again. Her rage and anger was all she had left, and every bit of pain that this man inflicted on her just became more resolve for her to pay him back for it. She was done feeling sorry for herself and was now wholly focused on getting revenge. Still, she had no means of fighting back right now, but as long as she was alive, she knew that one day her chance would come. Pain had been a constant in her life for nearly as long as she could remember. So, she was able to take it as she was subjected to any number of stimuli that were forced upon her in order to get another reaction from the item that now resided inside her. Nevertheless, nothing seemed to happen, and the researcher and his assistants soon concluded that inflicting pain was not going to further their research. Sir, I think it might be a matter of strength. Item may have merged with her, but she has almost no magical energy of her own as just a low-stage wild beast. I think if we can raise her rank up, she will have the power necessary to activate the divine item again. One of the researcher's assistants said to him. Nodding his head, he agreed with this assessment and told them to prepare a space for their new number 1 subject. It is time for you to go to sleep again. The researcher said, as he approached Evelyn with the glass box that had put her in a state of status. Quickly and without being able to put up any resistance, she was once again sealed away, only to be let out when it was convenient for the people experimenting on her. More time passed as Evelyn was frozen, unable to experience the flow of time, until she once again woke up. This time, however, she was not strapped to some laboratory table, but was instead back in a tree and a nest. Apprehension immediately took a hold of her, as she looked around in what appeared to be the outside world. But quickly she noticed that what looked like an endless horizon, was actually just painted walls mimicking what it would be like to live outside. She was still a trapped animal even if her cage had been expanded and was nicer now. Examining the area, she bobbed her head around getting a feel for the place she was being kept in now. They have me trapped in a cylindrical room that I guess is about 20 feet in diameter. Evelyn thought once she had finished looking around. Next, she flapped her wings around to make sure that she could still fly and that they had not clipped her wings. Luckily, she did not feel any problems and she was certain she could fly. Jumping out of the tree, she landed on the ground and began feeling around the area. It is real dirt and grass. But how deep does it go? Beginning to dig up the ground that felt like fresh soil, it was not long until Evelyn found that underneath the dirt about 6 inches deep was a stone floor. This confirmed to her that she was likely still underground and had just been put in a different room within the facility. I bet they are watching me right now. But why are they doing this? I do not think after all they have done to me, they are trying to get on my good side. Nothing they could ever do would make me forgive them. However, as Evelyn wondered what their end game was here by giving her a new place to live, she soon found out what they were trying to do. A panel on one of the walls slowly began to open, and out of it came a platter that had an assortment of items on it. Flying over to it cautiously, Evelyn found that there was food on this platter. Except it was not just any normal fare, but an assortment of nuts, fruits, and grasses that were similar to the ones that had been used as bait to lure her brother into a trap. Along with these were also a number of the stones that could be found within beasts and seemed to hold some type of power. Smelling them, Evelyn felt drawn to them as her instincts told her to eat them in order to make herself stronger. I see, so that is what they are doing. They want to fatten me up. Chapter 16 16 Days of Experimentation. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Seeing the meal that was laid out for her, and even understanding what these people wanted of her, Evelyn still dug in. She did not care that this was what they wanted, since she knew that this would make her stronger. I will play along for now, until I am strong enough to break free and kill them all. Evelyn thought, as she ate the magic stones and plants that were brimming with magical energy. As she ate them, a warm sensation permeated through her body, and she could feel herself getting stronger. I may not know how the magic in this world works, but as long as I continue to get stronger, I should figure it out eventually. Chowing down soon, Evelyn consumed all that had been offered to her, and a drowsiness swiftly started to overcome her. Having just eaten more than she ever had, her body was slow to process the overflowing energy within her. Still, before she fell asleep, she flew back up into the tree, and kicked the nest over to be spiteful. Before nestling herself as high up as she could. I am surprised at how cooperative it is being. The small assistant to the researcher said as he viewed down upon Evelyn. Yes, you are right. I was expecting her to throw the platter over and refuse to eat. Well, it works out well this way for us anyway. Now I am going to sleep, so make sure to monitor our new subject while I am away. The researcher then left to return to his room to get some sleep so that he would be ready for future experiments. Hours quickly went by as Evelyn slept, and a staggering change happened to her body during his time. She began growing at an exponential rate as the excess energy she had consumed was channeled through her body and made it stronger. When she awoke, she felt that something was off and that she was a bit sore. However, she soon realized why, as she noticed that she had easily grown 2 inches taller and was a bit more muscular than she had been before. That is definitely not normal. But I guess that explains my parents' large size. Eating those stones from other beasts and those plants that are enriched with magical energy, I can grow bigger and stronger. With this realization, Evelyn strived to make sure that she ate what was provided for her and to get strong enough to turn the tables on her captors. Once her first day in her new enclosure ended, the next came, then the next, and the days blended into weeks, and the weeks into months. During this time, Evelyn had pretended to act the model test subject. She made no attempts to escape, ate all of the food that was provided to her, and did not struggle when she was subject to tests. Many of which were painful. There were times when obvious escape options were even left open for her in what she presumed were tests, but she never took the bait. It was certain that they did not trust her not to flee at the first chance she got, but she proved them wrong time and time again. Of course, this was all just a part of Evelyn's plan to lull them into a false sense of security as she got stronger. She was now a little over 4 feet tall, and her muscles and bones were far stronger than they had been before. As her body used the magical energy she ate every day to enhance itself. Yet that was not all. Recently she had even started to get the hang of using magic. It was far from skilled, but she was able to move the wind around her like her parents had, even if it was far from what they had been able to do. At the very least she had been able to keep this under wraps by only creating small phenomenon that had no visible signs. Though she had still not been able to get the power of the object within her to activate again, even after all she had tired. Nevertheless, she was put through experiments nearly every other day to see if they could get the object to once again show its power. They would poke and prod her, electrocute her, and even opened up her chest and tired fiddling around with the thing that had rooted itself inside her. Nothing seemed to work though, and it was like the thing was in sleep mode and would not come back online. Still, the researcher and his assistants had seen the power of this item, and knew that it was something beyond the capabilities of their world. Something that had come from a higher realm. Chief, we have not been getting anywhere with our recent tests. The divine item has simply gone dormant. I think that it is time that we switch over our subjects and try again. It was rash of us to assume that a wild beast would be strong enough to activate it even if they are compatible. Sighing, the researcher looked at his assistants who had come to convince him to try a new subject. No, we are lucky that we were able to get it to successfully bind to any beast. Anyway, none of the other subjects we have right now are even close to being compatible. Our data shows that a strong soul is the most necessary aspect to be a suitable host for this item, and even the fiend beasts we have are far from good enough. We just need to wait a bit longer. We have already managed to advance it to the upper realms of a wild beast, and in a month or two we will be able to evolve it into a fiend beast. The researcher then turned his gaze back towards Evelyn, who was sitting up in her tree unmoving. He was already heavily invested in her and wanted to see the experiment through even if it would take a longer time than anticipated. But his assistants were simply not as patient as their master, and tried to plead with him to reconsider. Sir, I am sure that if we requisitioned with the leaders of the sect to supply us with some awakened beasts, they would be willing to oblige. There is no need for us to continue working with the scrapes we find out here in the Deadlands. Groaning, the researcher looked at his assistants like they were being morons, and said, "You know very well there are many reasons we have not been using awakened beasts in our experiments so far. First, they are not easy to procure, and we cannot afford to be killing them off. Second, our facility is not equipped to hold beasts of that level, so it would need to be upgraded. Third and most important, we are here to stay under the radar. We were lucky to get our hands on this item when it fell from the divine realm a year ago, but do not think that every other power on the continent is not looking for it. If we started bringing awakened beasts and more personnel here, we might as well broadcast that something important is happening here. No, for now we wait and see how our current subject does." Nodding their heads, the three remaining assistants stopped their push to move on to a better test subject. Or at least, they did on the surface. But ultimately, they had decided that it was time to advance their experiments even if their master did not. "We shall just have to have Elder Uriah contact the sect leadership for us and say that the chief needs some awakened beasts. We have already collected all of the data we need from wild and fiend beasts, and it will take at least a decade to raise that owl to a suitable level even if we give it the best resources." The short assistant said. "Yes, you are right. Once we have the awakened beasts delivered, he will realize we were right and give in." Another assistant said, agreeing. "Now let us lay the groundwork so that we can receive our superior subjects that will allow us to advance out understand of this divine object." The last assistant said. After that, the three of them began working behind the researchers' back to procure higher-level subjects. However, if only they had listened to the wisdom of their master, what was to happen in the near future never would have transpired. Chapter 1717 Comeuppance. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. You absolti morons. Did you really think that I would not find out what you are up to? Absolutely livid, the researcher was yelling at his assistants. Naturally, he had found out from Elder Uriah that his assistants had requisitioned for stronger beasts to be sent from their main headquarters. However, he had only found out after the orders had already been submitted, and the first shipment of 3 awakened beasts was already on the way. While he yelled at them, his 3 assistants lowered their heads and tried to act apologetic until their master's anger blew over. Yet what happened next was outside of their expectations. Quickly the researcher moved his hands in a certain pattern and cast a spell at them. Rhyme collars. Ice shot from his hands and attached itself to the necks of all three of the assistants, who looked down in horror. They could all feel the cold chill of the ice on their necks and knew what could happen next. All of them had seen this spell before, and they knew what it did. Now, which one of you was the leader of this idiotic idea that I specifically disobeyed? Their eyes going wide, they could tell that he was deadly serious. Immediately they began begging for forgiveness, and that they did it to advance their research. Sir, please, you have to understand. We did this for you as well. The leaders are going to get impatient if we do not deliver more results, and they will come down on you. It will simply take too long for us to wait for that owl to be a suitable specimen. The smaller assistant said. Unfortunately for him, this is not what the researcher wanted to hear, and snapped his fingers. As he did, the collar around the short assistant began to squeeze, and his face turned blue as his neck was crushed. The short assistant tried clawing at his neck to break the collar, but instead his fingers simply froze to it, and soon his head snapped off after his neck was fully frozen. I suppose that this was a necessary lesson I had not instilled in all of you. My orders are absolute, and I will not take any dissent. The researcher said to his two remaining assistants with a stern gaze. Nodding their heads, the two of them, with fear running through their entire beings, promised to never go against the researcher's orders ever again. Good. Now we have a lot of work to do. We are packing up and moving our operation. I must not have stressed the importance of keeping our operation here hidden, but it is imperative that we not be found by anyone. After saying this, the researcher waved his hand and dismissed his two remaining assistants and went to organize their move with Elder Uriah. Unfortunately, at this point it was already too late, and the researcher's fears were soon to be realized. Days quickly went by as they organized their abrupt move that was going at full speed. During this time, Evelyn, even though she was isolated from the rest of the facility in her room, noticed that something was wrong. It had been 5 days since the last test had been performed on her. And they had never gone this long without doing something awful to her. The only thing that was still the same was that food was brought to her at regular intervals, but no one ever came into her enclosure and dragged her off for experimentation. What is going on? Why are they leaving me alone now? Is this some type of test? Or are they preparing some new experiment that is taking time to prepare? The anticipation is almost as bad as the pain they constantly put me through. Unable to figure out what was going on, all Evelyn could do to occupy her time was practice her wind magic. She still was not able to do much with it, but she had gained enough control to send a gust of wind forward with about the same force as a shove from a normal fully grown man. Certainly, it was not much, but she was making progress with her control over the wind. Eventually, though, after around a week of being left on her own, something new happened. Evelyn felt a rumble throughout the area, and dust began to fall from the ceiling. For a moment she thought that maybe there was an earthquake happening around them, until she heard a huge explosion. Boom! The facility began to shake violently after this, and Evelyn began rocking back and forth as she sat on the tree in her enclosure. What the hell is going on? Jumping off from the tree, she began flying in the air to avoid the shaking of the facility that had even began to crack. The sturdy walls around her crumbled, and pieces of the ceiling were cracking off and falling. Crap! Evelyn thought as she dodged a piece of the ceiling. Certainly she was fine with the place breaking apart if it gave her an opportunity to escape, but right now it seemed more likely that she was to be buried alive as the place collapsed. More rumbling from above resounded through her room and began getting louder and louder. Then a massive root that was at least 10 feet thick pierced through the ceiling and smashed into the ground of Evelyn's enclosure. By some miracle it did not hit her, nor did she get buried under the tons of rubble that fell down. Gulping, she wondered what this was, since it had appeared out of nowhere, and what might happen to her. There was no way she could fight against whatever this was, and if this root turned towards her, she knew there was nothing she could hope to do. Luckily it did not spin around and attack her, but instead began receding back upwards out of the hole in the ceiling. However, as it lifted up, Evelyn was able to see that under where the root had smashed into the floor there was a red stain on the ground. Seeing this, she realized that there was some type of fight happening above, and the people that were holding her captive and had ruined her second life were dying. Even though she herself was not safe from danger, a smile did creep into Evelyn's face as she thought about all of those that had tortured her dying. I suppose that this is as good a time as any to get out of here. Flying up to the huge hole in the ceiling, she exited her prison that she had not left in over a week and began flying out. For the first time in months she was able to move about freely without any restrictions, and the liberation felt great. Well, I wanted to get my revenge myself, but I would rather not get caught again. If someone else will kill them for me, I guess that will have to do. Evelyn thought as she flew up the hole that led upwards. Unfortunately, it did not go all the way out of the facility, and as she reached the top she found herself in a familiar room. It was the place where she had first been kept in a tiny cage. Though now the room looked far different with cages strewn about the place and the walls and floors cracked and crumbling. It looked like a tornado had run through the area and the doors to the lab and the corridor that led to the facility's exit were broken open. Though the latter were blocked by a mountain of collapsed earth rumble. Feeling another tremor this time coming from below, Evelyn realized that the fighting was still going on in the facility. Flying around she looked for an opening in the ceiling in this room but did not find any that were large enough for her to escape through. Once she had finished searching this room, she flew into the laboratory area where she had watched her parents die and the divine item had been implanted into her. Yet as she entered, she saw that she was not alone, and in a collapsed part of the floor a person was clinging to life. There the researcher was there, bloody and buried under a large amount of rubble. Both of his legs and left arm were crushed under tons of earth, and a pool of blood was visible around him. He was currently struggling to rip the top off a vial that had a shimmering clear liquid in it. Seeing this, Evelyn felt that it was an act of providence, that the world was delivering her the person she hated the most on a silver platter. Swooping down she landed right above him and looked down as the slight backlight behind her illuminated her outline. It was an eerie sight to see, as if some demon had just appeared, and the researcher's eyes went wide as he recognized his favorite test subject, now free from her bonds. Jumping into the hole right on top of him, Evelyn stared at him with eyes full of murder, and his face twisted into fear and anger. He tried reaching for her with his one remaining limb, but he was far too injured, while Evelyn was in peak condition. She slipped right past him and raked her talons across his face. Blood began to fall from his face, and he had to close his eyes as red covered his vision. Flailing around he tried to hit Evelyn to keep her away from him. Nevertheless, in his condition he stood no chance now, even though he was normally far stronger than her. Landing on his shoulder, she dug her claws in deep before jumping off and continuing to torment the man who had cultivated the hatred in her heart. Say wanted to pay him back for all he had done to her, and the world had finally given her a chance to do so. Nevertheless, after a minute of slashing him up with her talons, the researcher went still the blood lost too much for him to fight back any longer. Seeing this, she knew it was time to finish up and to make her escape. It was uncertain who had attacked this facility, but she did not want to stick around and get caught by them. Delivering one last swipe from her claws, she cut through his neck, and blood began pouring out of his throat and down his body. A satisfied smile on her face, Evelyn felt a weight that had been pushing down on her heart begin to lift. Whoever said that revenge left you feeling empty was wrong. I feel elated. Evelyn thought as she watched the life leave the man who had killed her parents and subjected her to cruel experiments. With the researcher now dead and her chance for freedom before her, Evelyn took back into the air and began flying around the collapsing ceiling. Quickly she found an area where the light of the moon shone down and reveled and exited back up to the surface. Squeezing her way into this hole, she began clawing her way up the cramped space that barely was wide enough for her body to slip through. At some points she even needed to use her beak to dig out the dirt around her, but eventually she made it back to the surface. As soon as she poked her head out she saw a flash of light in the distance followed by a loud booming sound. Then another, and another, all around her through the woods. It appeared that the battle between those who ran this facility and those who were attacking was still raging on all around her. I guess I will go that way. Evelyn thought as she looked in the direction that was the quietest. Hopping on the ground, she kept her body low and did her best to stay unseen. There was no room for error, and she needed to be cautious in order to avoid being recaptured. Quickly she made her way out of the area, and when the flashing and rumbling of explosions was behind her, she opened her wings and took to the air, flying away from the facility that had been her prison for a long time. Chapter 1818 Aftermath. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Having escaped from the underground facility that had been her prison and managing to enact revenge against her chief tormentor, Evelyn flew as fast as she could away. She had no desire to stay anywhere near that place even if these woods were her home. Her parents had already died, and while she did not know the state of her siblings, she figured it was likely they were dead as well. So, she flew and flew for hours, until the sun had already risen high in the sky. At this point she had traveled a great distance and what stamina she had begun to wane. Looking around she found a decent tree that would give her some cover and landed within its branches. I just need a few hours of sleep and then I can continue. I am still in this damn forest, and I need to get out of here. Evelyn thought as she fell into unconsciousness. A few hours earlier, after Evelyn had made her escape, a number of men wearing white military uniforms walked around the remains of the underground facility she had been kept in. They were looking intently for a certain object, which unbeknownst to them had flown off during their raid. Have you not found it yet? A man with golden hair and piercing blue eyes said to one of the other men. It was quite obvious that he was in charge due to his demeanor and the number of badges all over his uniform. We are sorry, Captain, we have not found it yet. We have looked through their main lab and the body of their lead researcher, but the item is nowhere to be seen. Sighing, he looked over at one of the trees where 3 men had been tied up and said, "Fine, I suppose that I will just need to find some answers elsewhere." After that, all of the other men who were part of the unit that had attacked this facility looked away, and screams soon resounded throughout the forest. I see, so you successfully implanted it into a beast, an owl to be precise. That was most useful information. The blonde-haired man said. He then cast one last look at the man who had used to be one of the researcher's assistants, who was now bloody all over after a long round of torture. Quickly the leader relayed the information he had heard to his subordinates and had them search for an owl. Soon one of his men brought him a small cage, and inside was a small, frightened owl that looked malnourished and disheveled. What do you mean this is not the one? He said to the man he had previously interrogated as he showed him the owl his men had found. Dropping the cage that held Evelyn's brother in it, the blonde-haired man told everyone to search again and tear the place upside down if they had to. Eventually though, after many hours of searching, it was apparent that the beast that had fused with the item they were searching for was nowhere to be found. Capitan, we did however find traces of it. There was a large enclosure deep underground where we found feathers, and on a more important note, we found one of the people form the facility with talon marks all over their body. Getting this report from his men, it became quite clear that the subject they were after had escaped in the chaos of their battle. This does not bode well. The general told me that the order to secure this item from here came directly from the Empress. If we do not obtain it, there is chance of all of receiving punitive action. The blonde-haired leader said. Still, he had not lost hope yet. Spread out in groups of 2 and search the forest for any owls that you can find. Simply kill them and check to see if the item is embedded inside them. Now go and hope we can accomplish our mission. With their captain's orders relayed, all of the other soldiers set off into the forest in search of their quarry. Just a few minutes after multiple squads of people began fanning out through the forest to find her, Evelyn woke up from her sleep. Looking around, she was able to see that it was already dusk, and the sun was setting on the horizon. I slept for longer than I thought I would, but I guess this is fine since it is the perfect time to secure my next meal. As she thought this, her stomach rumbled a bit as she had not eaten for quite some time and had burned a lot of her energy in her escape. Hopping out of the thick branches where she was perched, she began scanning the area for anything to eat. Unfortunately, where she currently was nothing suitable showed up in her vision as she only spotted the occasional small insect flying around. I suppose I will have to put in a little more effort, Evelyn thought as she flapped her wings and lifted off from the tree. Flying around the area, while looking towards the trees and ground, she searched out for the first prey she would be hunting in a very long time. There. Something moving over on that tree. Spotting some sort of creature rustling in the branches of a tree, Evelyn flew up above the area and looked straight down. There she spotted some sort of rodent-like animal she had never seen before. To her it looked like a cross between a raccoon, squirrel, and porcupine. It had the face and feet of a raccoon, the slender body of a squirrel, and a bushy tail with quills sticking out of it. Naturally these quills had her a bit worried since they could spell disaster for her if she got hit. Luckily, she had other moves that a normal owl did not. Swooping down towards this beast, she headed right for it. Coming from the left side, and right as it noticed her, she abruptly shot her wings forward and sent out the strongest gust of wind she could with her magic energy. Being hit by this wind, the beast that resembled a raccoon, squirrel, and porcupine was ripped from the tree as its claws carved through the bark as it tried to keep a hold. Falling from a height of around 70 feet, the poor thing had no recourse to its current situation and soon hit the floor of the forest with a loud thud. Flying down, Evelyn found the beast still alive, but unable to move as it had broken several bones and had blood pouring out of its mouth. Quickly she ended the poor thing's suffering with her talons, before carrying it back up into a tree to eat her prize. She was practically starving at this point and ripped into, far from the human sensibilities she once had. It has been a long time since I had meat. All they fed me were those magically enriched plants and the stones that come out of beasts. Evelyn thought as she tore into her meal. Soon she had eaten the entire creature except for its core, which she saved for last. With one gulp she swallowed the core and felt the familiar sense of magical energy permeating throughout her body. I feel much better now that I have eaten. Time to get out of this forest and away from the hell I was trapped in for so long. Chapter 1919 Evelyn's Evolution. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Flying through the trees, Evelyn continued on her way out of the forest where she was born. There were simply too many bad memories here, and the thought of being captured again forced her to continue moving. She had currently been flying for days at this point, but still the expansive forest seemed to show no end. However, things had slightly changed on her most recent day of flying. The forest's color became a bit more vibrant, and with her keen vision and impeccable hearing she was able to see and hear the sounds of more beasts. Some of which were quite large. She had seen to this point a number of tigers, wolves, and some type of large lizard she had no desire to encounter on the ground. Luckily, in the treetops where she currently resided, there were not many beasts that were bigger than her. Though there were a number around the same size. And currently, she was in the middle of a fight over a single piece of fruit that lay hidden high up in a tree that looked different than all of the others. That silver plum is going to be mine, Evelyn thought as she dodged her opponent's talons and smacked them with her wing. Flapping around wildly after Evelyn essential close-lined it, the eagle she was fighting crashed into a few branches before regaining its balance. BL.net. Of course, back on Earth it would have been pretty abnormal for an owl and an eagle to fight over a piece of fruit, but not on this world. Certain plants absorbed magical energy, as Evelyn had long since figured out, and eating them definitely made her, or any beast for that matter, stronger. The second she had spotted this silver plum, her instincts had told her to eat it no matter the cost. So, she flew up to grab it, when she found that another large bird of prey had claimed it. Naturally, this eagle was fighting with its life on the line to take its prize that it had been waiting months to ripen. Except now a random owl happened by right before the magical fruit that was an incredible rarity was ready. Craw! Screeching loudly and angrily, the eagle announced its anger and hate towards Evelyn for fighting it for its meal. Unfortunately for it, Evelyn could care less about it, and swooped down for another attack. Flying up to meet her, the eagle threw its talons forward, ready to rake them across Evelyn, who was coming in head first. Yet before they impacted, she spun her body downward and passed right under the eagle. Then with the flap of her wings she sent a blast of wind up at the eagle and caused it to be pushed up and go off course. Crashing into even more branches, the eagle was battered and scraped up. Looking back with fury in its eyes, it saw Evelyn charging right for it, now that it was tangled up a bit. It had never been in a fight like this before, as normally the other birds that challenged it would simply attack head-on, and the two would fight with talons and beaks as they tore into each other. Though while this was the conventional approach that birds at the same level as Evelyn and this eagle normally fought, she had no desire to be clawed up when she could simply use counter-tactics to throw the eagle off. In a straight battle she was sure to lose, since this eagle was a bit bigger than her, had longer talons, and a stronger beak. Still, her human intelligence allowed her to implement strategies that this eagle, while not dumb, could never hope to come up with or expect. Continuing to use disruption and hit and run techniques, Evelyn wore the eagle down while avoiding all of its attacks. Finally, when she was certain the eagle was livid and nearing exhaustion, she flew away, and as expected it gave chase. Smirking, she went towards the area she had spotted at the beginning of their fight and knew would be a good place to unleash a final attack. Flying forward, Evelyn had the eagle hot on her tail, but this was exactly where she wanted it. As she passed under a fairly thick but flexible branch, she suddenly angled sharply upwards by using a wind gust. Heading upwards, she grabbed a hold of the branch and pulled up on it as far as she could, before releasing it. The eagle who had been following behind her had no chance to slow down or change its flight path in time, and with a loud crack was hit by the branch. However, this was only the first part of Evelyn's final attack, as just around a dozen feet below the branch she had pulled up on was another that was much thicker. The eagle, before it could right itself, crashed into this branch and let out a pained screech. Spinning around, she dove right towards the injured and stunned eagle, and with expert precision jammed her claws right into its neck. Blood began pouring out of the eagle as Evelyn sunk her talons in deeper, and it began thrashing about, trying to knock her off. But she was going for the kill and was in an advantageous situation. So, she did not let go even as the eagle's own claws racked against her back. Soon the eagle's resistance ended, and its life quickly left it as it lost a tremendous amount of blood from where Evelyn had punctured its neck. With her battle over, she jumped off of the eagle's body and went and laid herself against the trunk of the tree she and the eagle's corpse were on. Even though she had avoided getting injured too much, it had been an exhausting battle for her where she had pulled out all of her abilities and strategy. At least I managed to win. When it came flying at me from the branches as I went after the plum, I thought I was going to be a goner for a second there. After taking a good 20 minutes to recuperate, Evelyn sprang into action to eat her kill while it was still fresh. The eagle's meat was as good as any, and she had burned a lot of energy in her fight. Eating quickly, she tore through the eagle and consumed the meat on its body, before removing its core, which was the largest she had ever seen so far. It was close to the size of a lime, while all the others she had eaten were closer to that of a blueberry. I guess it was a lot stronger than anything I have taken down. Now I wonder what it will feel like to consume this. Plopping the stone into her mouth, she swallowed it in one gulp, and immediately felt the warmth of magical energy flooding through her body. Once she had given herself a few minutes to get accustomed to the energy entering her body from the eagle's core, she flew back up into the foliage where the plum was. Fortunately, it was still there, and now it had a slight glow about it that made it look even more tantalizing. Flying up to it, Evelyn looked around warily one last time, before ripping the plum from the branch it was on. However, one pull was not enough to rip it off, and in the end, she had to cut through it with her talons to get the tree to release its bounty. Having obtained the plum, Evelyn flew over to the eagle's previous nest, and took it as her own. There she began eating the plum that she had fought hard to win. As soon as she took the first bite, she got a taste of its sweet juices and flesh, that reminded her of a delicious fruit tart she had once had back on Earth when she was still a little girl. Digging in, she ate the entirety of the plum except for its pit, which she saved to plant somewhere nice as thanks to the tree for giving her this delicious fruit. Yet as she was about to fly off and continue her journey, she felt her body pulsing and a sharp pain permeated through her body. For an instant she thought that maybe the plum was poisonous, but she soon recognized this feeling. It was similar to when she had first taken in the strange purple sphere that was surrounded by 4 rings. She could feel it that her body was rearranging itself, as it used all of the energy that had been stored in the plum and the eagle's core to advance her to the next level. Still, it was a paralyzing pain that caused her to slump over on her side and begin to twitch violently. Abruptly though, the pain ceased, and her body began to glow slightly. Before an itchy feeling overcame her instead. It was terribly uncomfortable, but she could hardly move, and anything she tried to do to mitigate the uncomfortable itchiness failed. Eventually all she could do was grit her beak together and bear with it as her body underwent some type of change. Hours went by like this, and Evelyn could only wonder how much longer it was going to go on. At a certain point she felt that this might be even worse than the pain she had experienced, simply because of how maddening it was to feel so itchy. Nevertheless, eventually the feeling began to subside, and the glow around her vanished. Letting out a breath of relief, Evelyn was grateful that she no longer was in extreme discomfort. Shaking herself off and summoning a gust of wind to cool off with, she accidentally blasted herself with her own magic and knocked herself against the side of the nest. She had just been trying to summon a small breeze, but instead got hit with what previously would have been the most force she could generate. Immediately she realized that she had gotten a lot stronger, and also quite a bit bigger as well. She had grown over a foot taller and was now closer to the size her parents had been. Of course, this was due to her evolving from a wild beast into a fiend beast, which at this time Evelyn had no clue about. Chapter 20 New Powers. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. After her evolution, Evelyn felt completely different. Not only did she feel much physically stronger, but she also felt the magical energy within her had grown exponentially. Before she felt like she just had a small pond of it, but now it seemed that the power within her had increased to the size of a lake. This was just the massive difference in power between her form as a wild beast and her evolution into a fiend beast. However, as she was inspecting herself, a sudden wave of pressure passed over her, and for the first time since it had first been implanted in her, the purple sphere surrounded by 4 rings began to move. She finally had the bare minimum amount of energy within her to activate its powers, and it was now time to communicate with its new host. Immediately she felt a sharp pain in her head as information was sent directly into her mind from the divine item that had fused with her body and soul. Falling back over, Evelyn had a terrible headache as she processed what was being sent to her. Luckily the process did not last very long as she feared it might have, and the splitting headache she had a moment ago turned into a dull pain that was slowly disappearing. Shaking her head, she managed to disperse the lingering befuddlement from the information she had just received. Unfortunately, most of it from what she could tell was a diagnostic report that the Ethersphere, which she assumed was the name of this item, was heavily damaged and running at minimum capacity due to lack of energy. Still, it had not all been useless as it had also told her what kind of magic was sealed within this object, and Evelyn could only smile at it. She had come up with some theories during her time in captivity and this was probably the best one she could have hoped for. So, this thing really does give me the power to control gravity. However, what it could do right now was limited to simply creating a field around her that either increased or lowered the gravity in an area. Nevertheless, she thought it was pretty impressive to be able to control gravity, which was still a pretty big mystery that people back on Earth had barely scratched the surface of. Practically dancing around as she learned this, for the first time in a while she had something to be happy about. Having already experienced how cruel this world was, she knew she would need power if she never wanted to end up bound and at the mercy of others ever again. With her spirits rising, Evelyn felt like going to test out her new powers when her stomach began rumbling. It had at this point been several hours since her last meal, and even with the immense amount of energy that had been stored within the silver plum she ate, almost all of her reserves had been used for her evolution. Needing something to eat and wanting to test out her new powers, she jumped from the nest she had appropriated, and began flying back down toward the floor of the forest. She really wanted to see what she could do now, and needed a worthy beast to see how much stronger she had become. Flying around the area, she searched for one of the 3 largest predators she had seen so far in this area of the forest and soon spotted one. Currently feasting on some type of deer, was a large male tiger. It was a massive beast that was 2 to 3 times larger than Evelyn after her evolution and was considered one of the top predators back on Earth. Yet, while she had felt fear and wariness when she had spotted this tiger the other day while flying overhead, now it seemed about as threatening as an old house cat. She did not know why she felt this way, but instinctively she knew she was in a realm above this tiger. Swooping down, she caught the tiger that was busy eating its hard-won meal by surprise and slammed her claws right into it with her full force. Astonishment on both Evelyn's and the tiger's face as this happened was apparent, as her claws ripped into the top predator, and the strength of her blow sent it skidding a few feet across the ground. What the hell? Seeing this, Evelyn could almost not believe what had happened. She had just launched a tiger that was much larger than her, and sliced through its thick fur and muscle like they were made of tofu. Getting up and growling, the tiger looked for the being that had just attacked it, and quickly spotted Evelyn hovering in the air about 20 feet above it. As soon as it spotted her, the anger in its eyes turned to fear as it felt the overwhelming difference in their power. This tiger was only an upper wild beast, and it could feel the dense mana and strength that Evelyn had as a beast that had evolved to the next stage. Turning around with its tail in between its legs, the tiger did not even think about the notion of fighting back and ran away as fast as it could. Confusion all over her face, Evelyn had figured that a beast as prideful and violent as a tiger would attack immediately, but instead it ran in fear like a scared kitten. Wait, I haven't even tested out my magic yet. Evelyn thought as she flew after the tiger. At least as she gave chase, she figured this would be a good time to test out her greater power over the wind and her new gravity magic. Creating a field around herself, Evelyn lowered her own gravity by around 10% and with each flap of her wings sent a gust of wind behind her to speed up. However, the results were more impressive than she thought they would be, and she shot forward at a tremendous speed and easily overtook the tiger she was chasing. Looks like my power output with wind magic is a lot greater than it had been before. I wonder if I can use attacks like parents had now. Evelyn thought. Though as she remembered her parents from her second life, a sense of sadness she had been suppressing welled back up, and she paused in the air for a few moments and closed her eyes. After taking a few seconds to calm down and push her trauma back into the depths of her mind, she turned her attention back to the tiger that had changed directions and was continuing to run away from her. Luckily, this hunt was the perfect thing to take her mind off of the despair she did not want to and had no intention of facing right now. Flapping her wings with gusts of wind behind her and lowering the gravity around her even more, Evelyn launched forward right up to the tiger. Once she was next to it, she switched from decreased to increased gravity, and used all she could muster. In just an instant, the tiger that had been experiencing normal gravity was suddenly under 3 times as much pressure, and its sprint soon turned into a struggle just to walk. Of course, her own power excluded her if she wanted, and while everything else around her in a 10-foot diameter was under the effects of 3 times normal gravity, she was unaffected. Easily keeping pace with the tiger that had basically slowed to a crawl and was panting, Evelyn wanted to see just how long it could keep up. Unfortunately, she soon felt that her magical energy had dropped to an alarmingly low level, as using the gravity powers of the astrosphere drained her quickly. Turning off the increased gravity field around her, she watched the tiger suddenly burst forward with renewed vigor as its body felt 3 times lighter. I guess it is not even going to try and fight back, Evelyn thought as the tiger ran away again. She had purposefully stopped near it to see if it would attack, but the poor beast was far too scared of her to even think about fighting. Realizing that all she was doing now was being cruel to the tiger, she flew above it and prepared to unleash a finishing blow. Pulling out almost all of the magical energy she had left, she threw her wings forward and sent out the strongest gust of wind she could. Unable to even hope to avoid the attack that came from above it, the fleeing tiger was flattened into the ground by the strongest blast of wind Evelyn could use, that even cracked the ground under it. See still, this had not killed the tiger or really injured it much. Only immobilizing it for a moment. Nevertheless, Evelyn had already known that this attack would not kill the tiger and swooped down on top of its immobile form and slid her talons through its neck. Almost instantly the tiger died, as she cut right through its spine with her talons that were now as sharp and sturdy as the best swords back on earth.